When you look at the history of Christianity, the truth is it is Christianity that slaughtered everyone else, every other culture, and stole their land.
The same playbook used by Christians to pillage and annihilate all the cultures of the world is currently used in India to destroy India's magnificent Vedic culture, which is also the oldest surviving ancient culture of the world. Only two ancient cultures surviving are Chinese and Indian Vedic culture. Chinese is 5,000 years old, and Indian is anywhere between 10,000 to 15,000 years old. Now, we look at how Christians actively destroyed the classical world of ancient Greek and Roman civilizations, eliminating all classical literature and advancements made in math, science, astronomy in those Greek and Roman cultures. Since introduction of Christianity, Europe has gone into a thousand years of dark ages. Christianity became the official state religion of the Roman Empire on February 27th, 380 CE. On this date, Emperor Theodosius I issued the Edict of Thessalonica, which declared Nicene Christianity as the empire's official faith.
Theodosius I, who reigned from 379 to 395 AD, was the last emperor to rule over both the Eastern and Western Roman empires. His most significant contribution to Christianity came in 380 AD, when he issued the Edict of Thessalonica, declaring Nicene Christianity as the official state religion of the Roman Empire. This edict marked a turning point, as it established Christianity as the dominant faith and paved the way for the Church's central role in European society. Theodosius also convened the First Council of Constantinople in 381 AD, which reaffirmed the Nicene Creed and condemned Arianism, further solidifying Orthodox Christian doctrine. His efforts to suppress pagan practices and heresies helped to unify the empire under a single faith, profoundly shaping the future of Christianity. Theodosius's reign laid the foundation for the Christianization of Europe, making him a key figure in the spread and establishment of the Christian faith.
Let's examine how Christians eliminated all the native cultures in Europe.
The Christian destruction of classical antiquity, when does that really begin?
Well, it gets out of the starting gate very quickly. At the start of the 4th century, almost as soon as Constantine adopts Christianity as his religion, in the course of his lifetime, he demolishes 4 pagan temples, including a temple of Asclepius, who was a healing god and a bit of a competitor, seen as a competitor to Jesus. You get laws calling them the heretical people who aren't Christians start to become heretical monsters, or they start to become the insane pagans. And you start to get these very, very fierce laws that say that the temples shall be closed, that if anyone sacrifices to the wrong gods, they shall be beaten, they shall be fined. These extremely serious penalties start to come into place. And in the books, you have atomism. You have ideas that the world is just made of atoms. There's no God. Don't worry about God. Be free of your worries. Religion is just going to drag you down. All of these ideas are, to a Christian, extremely nervous-making. I go to this classical book, but not that one, because there's so much in these texts that is, to a Christian mind, dangerous. There's other gods. I'm going to read it, but I don't think you should. In some cases, you do get these dramatic renunciations where people become Christian and then burn their entire library, like Clement of Alexandria saying that people should steer clear of it, because you might take on some poison with the honey. The real loss, the utterly devastating loss, happens not with piles of books being burnt. It happens through just a disdain and almost total lack of interest, verging on hostilities. And what happens then is that Christians stop copying out these books. And that is when it's in the 4th century, really, that the greatest losses happen. That is when there's a almost total collapse. I was talking to an academic about this week. He said he felt that that was the moment, but then there's an almost total collapse in the copying of classical works in the first Christian century. And I had read it had happened a little later. I had read 6th century. By the 6th century, it's almost all gone.
What kind of a loss are we looking at when it comes to ancient writings?
The loss of ancient writings is vast. It's hard to forget this because we know so much about the ancient world. So scholars estimate that we have about 1% of Latin literature left, and for Greek it's assumed to be a little higher, maybe sometimes 2%, but other scholars say less than that, 1%. A way you can picture this is less by looking at what they did than looking at what existed in Rome. So if someone had taken a walk across the Roman Forum in around 300 AD, if the young Emperor Constantine, before he came to power, had taken a walk from across Rome, he would have passed a temple to Isis, he would have passed a temple to Mithras, he would have passed a temple to the Emperor Vespasian, he would have passed a temple to Jupiter, to all of these different gods, many of them foreign. He would have passed temple after temple, coexisting more or less happily with each other. If you had taken the same walk 100 years later, they would all have been forbidden from being worshipped.
And so we look at these pagan temples coexisting. There's obviously harmony, probably not only among the temples, but realistically among their followers as well. If they start killing each other, it's probably not going to be for religious purposes. But also on the flip side, we look at the rise of Christianity. And if it's one thing Christians were really good at doing in the early church, that was killing off each other. And my question for that is, and you touch on that in your book, why is there such a stark difference between pagans getting along and then Christians just going at it like almost a gang war in classical antiquity?
So there's this lovely quote from this historian called Ammianus Marcellinus, who says, no wild beasts are so aggressive to each other as Christians are to one another. And there's another one who says, well, the only thing they agree on is the name of Christian. Well, actually, I mean, they don't even agree on that because they only see themselves as Christians and everyone else as heretics. Why is it that they have so many gods and they can all get on, and we have just one and we argue all the time? A tragic loss of culture and intellectual liberty. Criticizing someone's religion is a bit like criticizing someone's mom. It's something you've been brought up with. It goes to a place, it hits you in a place that is very emotional.
Imagine a world where celebrating your family tradition suddenly becomes a crime. That fear is creeping in now. Whispers of new laws, restrictions on ancient rites. How long until whispers turn to silence? The year is 380 AD, a hammer blow to the old world. Theodosius III decrees Christianity is the one true faith of Rome. No more tolerance, no more compromise, an empire united under one God, but at what cost? On the surface, traditional pagan weddings, illegal, becomes an act of defiance. A wedding day, love, celebration, but this marriage in the eyes of the empire doesn't exist. Why? Because Theodosius made traditional pagan weddings illegal, erasing a culture one ceremony at a time. Magic, heresy, dangerous words in a dangerous time. A scholar's haven turned into a battlefield. Scrolls, instruments, a lifetime of work. Gone.
The result of Christianity within 200 years of its legalization, loss of classical work, sciences, literature, math, etc. are eliminated. Loss of intellectual liberty. People cannot think for themselves. Tremendous emotional damage. Loss of practices, rituals, and ancient traditions. Lack of motivation to copy the classical work. Lack of creativity, innovation, and philosophy. Creation of narcissist tendencies, we will see in the next videos. By mid 500 AD, Christianity has started the dark ages of Europe. Next, we will briefly examine how European native and indigenous cultures are further destroyed.
A unified empire, a ruler crowned emperor by the Pope himself, reformed the church, standardizing liturgy and strengthening its role in governance. Under Charlemagne, the church became not just a spiritual institution but a pillar of imperial unity. Charlemagne's longest and bloodiest campaigns were waged against the Saxons, a pagan people who resisted his authority for decades. The most infamous episode came in 782 at Verdun. After a rebellion, Charlemagne ordered the execution of 4,500 Saxons who refused to convert to Christianity.
Meet Olaf II Haraldsson, Norway's king, who tried to convert the Norwegians to Christianity against their will.
Northern Crusades were wars fought in the 12th and 13th centuries to convert pagan tribes in the Baltics, including Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, to Christianity.
He also instructs the leaders of the church to build Christian churches on top of pagan temples and sacred sites, so people would go there. If you're in Europe, if you go to these very, very old churches, a lot of those were built right on pagan sacred sites. So we have a penitential written by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Theodore, and we find more than one example there of the church forcefully baptizing children after their birth, and their pagan parents resisting this, and it came to violence, and it even came to sometimes killing or abandoning their children because they didn't want them to be baptized. A famous account there was a woman who had 2 children, and one of her children died during birth and the other one lived. She brought the dead child to be baptized, actually, to try and trick the bishop into letting the dead one be baptized while the living one was not. Tens of thousands of lives lost, executions, villages burned down, people tortured, women being captured. We can go into it all day about the horrible thing. Destroyed their sacred symbol Irminsul in the year 772. Irminsul was the Mecca of the Germanic peoples. It was a very sacred place that we think was either a very large tree trunk or pillar that reached high into the sky, giving the death penalty for anyone who was practicing pagan traditions or believed in these native traditions. The highlight of it was Donar's oak that he cut down, or Thor's oak tree, which was believed to be the most sacred tree of the time, where it was central for religious worship and gatherings and things like that. And the Franks plundered and burned all the pagan temples and sanctuaries around the area. The Roman Emperor Otto was invading Denmark, trying to forcefully Christianize them. Number 1 was Olav Tryggvason, who used kind of lies and sneaky tricks to get his way to the Norwegian throne. And when he was king, he tried to convert the people of Norway peacefully, until his army was strong enough, and then he used violence once he had enough power to do so. He destroyed pagan temples, statues, and we have a few examples of him using torture to convert the people of Norway. Then we have Olav number 2, Olav the Saint, Olav Haraldsson, who used, again, trickery to kind of gain the crown of Norway, and Olav went from village to village with his army, forcing people to convert or die, and he even sneakily smashed a pagan statue of a god while others were looking away at something else, and he said that it was Jesus that did it, so our God is more powerful than yours. But eventually, violent conversion came to Sweden too. In the 1080s, King Inge decided to end the traditional pagan sacrifices at Uppsala. Paganism was still practiced, but it was practiced on the underground for many hundreds of years. We have laws in the 1200s all the way up to the 1800s prohibiting certain pagan beliefs and practices, and they were actually being enforced at the time too, so we know they were happening. We know there were still pagans around. This is what a lot of these witch trials were about, actually.
The Christianization of Europe involved a complex interplay of narcissist suppression, adaptation, and assimilation of indigenous cultures and traditions, even until 1800s. In the case of Europe, their own traditions. These Christians are so narcissist that they even persecuted, murdered, and publicly punished their own kind, Christians, who didn't follow the Bible word for word and seem to have broken some Christian laws. These are called inquisitions that happened in Europe for 350 years.
The consequences of the Inquisition, however, reach far beyond fatalities. In some places, an estimated 1/3 of prisoners were tortured. hundreds of thousands of members of religious minorities were forced to leave their homes, and those who remained faced discrimination and economic hardship. Smaller inquisitions in Spanish colonial territories in the Americas, especially Mexico, carried their own tolls. Friends turned in friends, neighbours accused neighbours, and even family members reported each other of heresy. Under the Inquisition, people were condemned to live in fear and paranoia for centuries.
17th, 18th, and 19th century has witnessed intense colonialism. It is in the nature of Christians to pillage culture, knowledge, and traditions. That is what they have done to regions they have conquered outside Europe. Christians have effectively destroyed various indigenous nations in North America, the Guanche of the Canary Islands, the Aborigines of Tasmanians, and the Selk'nam of Tierra del Fuego, and many other cultures, including Australia and Africa. Recently, in the last 300 years, Christians have murdered millions. Christians killed 100 million Native Americans in USA, wiping out their 1,000 years of culture and traditions. Hitler during World War II killed 6 million Jews and another 6 million died. Christian British killed 20 million Aboriginals in Australia. France, Germany, Netherlands, Spain killed many millions in Africa and South America. Christian British killed 100 million Indians from 1790 to 1945. Christian Europeans killed 12 million during transatlantic slave trade. This is a murderous horror story that has been going on since 2000 years. Now, let's examine what Christians did during colonialism to India. Goa Inquisition, pillage and banning of Sanatana Dharma practices.
The Portuguese were actually the first to start the process of colonization in India. The very clear agenda of colonizing the Indian people who are Hindus. But in Goa, they were able to establish their rule, so to say, and they put up an inquisition which started implementing laws which were, I mean, discriminatory is a very small word. It basically banned Hindus from pursuing or carrying out any of the religious practices at all. So, in essence, they were pushing Hindus towards, if you want to survive, you have to convert. Otherwise, it's very difficult to even live as a Hindu.
Aryan race theory, created to separate Vedic accomplishments from Hindus and attributed to Central Asians or Europeans themselves.
Implausible Aryan invasion theory. It is a wrong and baseless conjecture without even a single evidence. It is all totally disproved. Prejudiced and ill-conjectured Aryan invasion theory with a selfish motive by the European, especially the Friedrich Max Müller and others, is totally unscientific and a blatant lie. This Aryan invasion theory mentioned that we are not the sons of this soil. We are outsiders who came long back and settled here. It is not our own land.
The modern genetic research is very clearly saying that that nation, the genetic pool of that nation has been unchanged for 20,000 years. Nobody out from no huge outside influence entered India.
Calculated destruction of ancient Vedic education system called Gurukul.
British saw this as a threat to their systems and to their ideologies. The Gurukul system is essentially a system where the student would live with the teacher, serve the teacher, and learn as many as 18 different streams of education. The British wanted puppets rather than people who could think on their own, so they carefully dismantled the educational system and they abolished the whole system.
The massacres, the power, and the looting of India.
Artificial famines. The British created them. Millions starved while they kept exporting food to Britain. Instead of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, British troops fired 1,600 bullets into a peaceful crowd, then blocked the exits, and General Dyer, he called it necessary. The British sucked over $45 trillion from India.
The exploitation of Varna system into caste system.
White, European, Christian missionaries, and they were talking about how to break the integrity of jatis, because every jati had its own deity. The missionaries often wrote about the fact that it's going to be impossible to convert Bharatiyas without using underhanded means and methods.
Those are some methods attempted by the Christians to destroy the Indian Vedic culture. The next video will be about how the Christians in the modern day are destroying Indian Vedic culture. Like, share, and comment.